Idaho Territory, spring of 1878. The wind dragged dust across the dry yard as 17-year cicadas screamed in the trees, and a girl knelt in front of her father, her knees bruising on the packed dirt. "Say it again," he snapped, stepping closer, the sharp scent of whiskey heavy on his breath. Jovie Adams lowered her eyes, her voice tight. "I will marry whoever you say." "That is right," he growled, grabbing her chin hard enough to leave red marks. "You will marry Bill Turner, and you will not say a word more about it." Jovie didn't cry. She had stopped doing that a long time ago. Her hands were shaking, though. She could feel the earth beneath her palms, cold and stubborn. She wanted to disappear into it. Behind them, the door of the ranch house creaked open. "Let her go," a quiet voice said. Jonathan Adams turned, already furious. "You are not part of this, Cowboy." Nathaniel Prescott stood tall at the gate, dust on his boots and a rifle slung over his shoulder. His shirt was sun-faded but clean, his brown hair tousled from the long ride in. His eyes were steady, fixed on Jovie. "She is," Nathaniel said, stepping inside the yard. "And I am." Jovie's father laughed, but it was a mean sound. "She is my daughter. You think just because you come around fixing fences and driving cattle, you get to tell me what to do with her?" "I think," Nathaniel said slowly, "that a man who makes his daughter kneel in the dirt to force her into a marriage with a known drunk is no father at all." That was when Jovie looked up. She hadn't seen Nathaniel in nearly 3 months, not since winter. Not since he gave her his coat and lit the fire in the bunkhouse for her when her father locked her out in the snow. She remembered his hands, rough but gentle, and his voice, always soft when he spoke to her. Her father stepped toward him, shoulders squared. Nathaniel pulled something from his saddlebag and held it out. A small silver ring. Simple. Worn smooth. "If she says yes, she is coming with me. I will marry her today. She will be safe. And she will never kneel to anyone again." Jovie's breath caught. She looked from the ring to Nathaniel's face. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were full of something that made her throat close up. Not pity. Never pity. Something steadier. Something that made her feel like she was standing even while still on her knees. "You do not get to take my daughter like she is she gets to choose," Nathaniel cut in. Jovie stood slowly. Her knees ached. Her hands were scraped, but her voice was clear. "I choose him." Her father stormed across the yard, but Nathaniel was faster. He stepped in front of her, one hand on the rifle, the other holding the ring. "You lay another hand on her," Nathaniel said, "and I will see to it you never raise one again." The older man stopped, breathing hard, face red. Then he spat in the dirt and turned away, muttering. Nathaniel turned to Jovie. "You have to say it out loud if you mean it." She looked at the ring, then at him. "Idaho." He took her hand gently, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit loosely, but it stayed. Jovie closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, her chest stopped hurting. They left that afternoon. Nathaniel packed her a satchel, just one dress, a comb, and her mother's old shawl. That was all she had. That was all she wanted to take. They rode out on his horse, the sun behind them, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. She did not cry, but when she exhaled, it sounded like relief. They stopped in a small town called Elk Hollow before nightfall. The preacher was still awake. Nathaniel stood beside her at the altar, hat in hand, voice steady. When the preacher asked if he would take her, Nathaniel looked at her like she was the only thing in the room. "I will," he said, and he meant it. Jovie said it too, and for the first time in her life, her voice did not shake. Afterward, they stayed in a small inn. There was only one bed, and it was narrow. Nathaniel pulled the blanket over her shoulders and sat on the edge, not touching her. "You are safe now," he said. "I will not ask anything of you. Not until you want me to." She reached for his hand. "I already do." He looked at her, surprised. She touched his cheek, fingers brushing the stubble there. You are the only one who ever saw me. He leaned down, slowly, carefully, and kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not hungry. It was gentle, warm. She closed her eyes, and her fingers curled in his shirt. When they laid down together, it was not with urgency. It was with quiet wonder. He whispered her name like it mattered. She held on to him like he was the only thing she had ever trusted. And maybe he was. In the morning, she woke before him. His arm was around her waist, his face buried in her hair. She did not want to move. She wanted this moment to last forever. He stirred when she shifted. You all right? She turned to face him. More than all right. He smiled, and it reached his eyes. You look free. I feel it. They rode west the next day, toward Larkspur Valley, where Nathaniel had his own land. A small cabin, a creek, and a few dozen head of cattle. Not much, but it was theirs now. She leaned against him as they rode, and for the first time in her life, the wind in her face felt like it was carrying her towards something good. And beside her, holding the reins steady, the man who had claimed her safely kept her close. The trail into Larkspur Valley narrowed between two ridgelines choked with pine, sunlight slanting in long bars through the branches. They rode without speaking for a while, the only sound the creek's quiet rush beside the path and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on damp soil. When they crested the last rise, the valley opened like a cupped hand-wide meadowland rimmed with snow-capped peaks, the grass already greening in the thaw. Nathaniel dismounted first, tying his gelding to a low branch. He offered his hand without a word, and Jovie took it, her boots landing soft in the mossy earth. She looked around slowly, taking in the small cabin tucked beneath a cottonwood grove, a split-rail fence, and the dark shapes of cattle farther off in the pasture. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney. "You've got neighbors?" she asked, brushing her skirt down. "Closest is 2 miles east," he said. "Retired army man and his sister. Don't see 'em much unless somebody's calf goes missing." She nodded, glancing at the cabin again. "It looks lived in." "It's mine," he said. "But it'll be yours too now if you want it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped toward the porch, her hand running lightly along the railing. The wood was weathered, but solid. The door stood open, welcoming. Inside, she could make out shelves lined with jars, a stone hearth dark with soot, and a simple table with 2 chairs. She turned back to him. "You built this." "Some of it. The bones were here when I bought the land. Took most of last year fixing it up." She didn't ask how he'd come by the money. She could see it in his hands, scarred, strong, the kind that didn't get soft in winter. He hadn't come by anything easy. "I'll cook tonight," she said. His brow lifted, not in protest, just surprise. "You've been feeding yourself all this time," she added. "I'm guessing it's been mostly beans and whatever doesn't burn." He gave a quiet chuckle. "That's accurate." She stepped past him toward the door. "Then let me do something useful." He followed but paused beneath the eaves. "There's a garden patch behind the cabin. Old woman who owned this place left wild garlic and rhubarb. I haven't touched it yet this season." She pushed open the door fully and stepped inside. The air smelled of pine ash and leather. A pale quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. There were no curtains, just muslin cloth pinned against the windows. Clean, though. Everything was clean. When she turned, he was still watching her from the doorway. "You don't have to keep waiting on me to bolt," she said softly. "I'm not. You flinch every time I look too long. I just don't want to take more than you're ready to give." She walked to him then, close enough to see the faint sunburn on his cheekbones. "You already gave me more than anyone else ever did. A name I could say without fear. A place I could walk into standing upright." He didn't move, but something eased in his face. "Let me make dinner," she said. "Then tomorrow, you can show me how to mend that fence I saw near the pasture. That'll make us even." He stepped aside to let her pass, and as she moved back toward the little kitchen alcove, she heard him murmur, "It won't, but I'll let you believe it." She found flour in a tin, dried apples in a sack, and enough lard to make a passable crust. He brought it in a bucket of water from the pump while she worked, setting it down without comment. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't offer, but he stayed nearby, splitting kindling just outside the door where she could see him through the window. As the pie baked, the scent filled the cabin sweet and warm, edged with cinnamon. She set the tin on the sill to cool and turned to find him watching her again, this time without the guardedness. "I can't remember the last time I smelled something that good," he said. "You will if you keep me around."
Y planto.
They ate at the table with their knees brushing under the wood. He didn't speak much while he chewed, but when the pie was gone, he leaned back and looked at her like something had shifted. "You always cook like that?" "Only when I think someone deserves it." He tilted his head. "So not often." "Not before now." Later, after the dishes were rinsed and set upside down on a cloth, they sat on the porch, her shawl draped over both their shoulders. The moon rose pale and round over the trees, the meadow silver with dew. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "You're not what I expected when I first saw you that day in the snow." She turned to look at him. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd given up." Her voice was quiet. "I almost had. But you didn't." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his chin atop her hair. "No," she whispered, "because someone saw I was worth more." He said nothing, but his arm came around her, steady and sure. The night deepened, but neither of them moved. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the silence. The stars came out, and the wind softened, and for the first time in her life, Jovie felt what it meant to belong somewhere. And someone. The first storm of the season rolled in 2 weeks later, sudden and loud, with thunder that rattled the cabin walls and rain that came down in sheets. Nathaniel had just come back from the southern fence line with his coat soaked through and his boots heavy with mud. Jovie met him at the threshold, towel in hand, her cheeks flushed from the fire. "I told you the sky was turning," she said, handing him the cloth. He wiped his face, water dripping from his hair onto the floorboards. "I thought I had time." That pine post was leaning bad. She stepped aside to let him in, already reaching for the kettle. "You're going to catch your death out there." "I've had worse," he said, but there was no pride in it, just fact. She poured hot water into a tin cup and passed it to him. "You always do everything alone?" He took the cup slowly. "Didn't used to. My brother and I worked a plot north of here, near Haley." Her hands paused over the kindling basket. "What happened?" "Mountain fever. Took him in 5 days."
He didn't look at her as he said it.
"I buried him myself." Jovie didn't fill the silence. She knelt beside the hearth instead, feeding in a few dry sticks. The fire caught quickly, snapping bright. When she stood again, he was watching her over the rim of the cup, his face unreadable. "You're not afraid of quiet," he said. "No," she replied. "I've lived in houses where silence was safer than speaking." He set the cup down, steam still curling above it. "You don't owe me stories." "Not unless you want to tell them." "I know," she said. "But I never had someone worth telling them to." He didn't press. He just sat, pulled off his boots, and set them near the hearth to dry. She brought him a dry shirt from the chest by the window, and he changed without turning his back to her, his movements unhurried, his trust unspoken but clear. As the storm deepened, they sat near the fire, her mending a tear in one of his shirts, him sanding the handle of an old axe. The rhythm of the rain became almost steady, the kind that made the land drink deep. She glanced at him. "When you said you'd marry me, did you already know you wanted to?" "Before that day." He didn't look up from the blade. "I knew the second time I saw you."
Her needle paused.
"What changed?" "You weren't afraid to meet my eyes." Not many people do, not out here. She breathed in slowly. You didn't flinch when I told you I'd been locked out in the snow. I was angry, he said, setting the axe aside, but not surprised. I'd seen the kind of man your father was. Just hadn't known how bad it got. I used to pray for somebody to hear me, she said. Most nights, I didn't think anyone ever would. I heard. His voice was low, but sure. Even when you didn't speak. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing the back of his. His skin was warm, calloused, real. The wind outside howled, shaking the shutters. But inside, the fire held steady, and beside it, so did they. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Every day, he said. But not in the way I used to. What way is that? Used to wonder if I'd still be standing come spring. Now I wonder what kind of flowers we ought to plant behind the cabin. She smiled, a small, rare thing. I've always liked cornflowers. My ma used to point them out in the field edges. Then cornflowers it is. She leaned into him slowly, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. He didn't move except to turn his hand over and lace their fingers together. The storm passed some time in the night, but they stayed near the fire until the coals turned soft and red. In the morning, the air was clean, the earth outside damp and rich with promise. Nathaniel stepped out onto the porch to check the sky, and Jovie came behind him, arms wrapped around his waist from behind. You think the fence will hold? She asked. Not without help, he said. She tilted her head against his back. Then come on. Let's fix it. They saddled the horse together, packed nails and wire, and made their way out toward the southern edge of the land. The sun broke through the clouds as they walked, and in the distance, a hawk wheeled above the pines. Nathaniel glanced sideways at her. You ever done fence work? No, she said. But you didn't know how to bake a pie, and you figured it out. He chuckled once, shook his head. Fair enough. And as they set about mending what had shifted in the storm, hand by hand, knot by knot, the ground beneath them felt steadier than it ever had before. By late April, the land had dried enough for planting. Nathaniel turned the soil in quiet rows while Jovie knelt beside the furrows, dropping seed beans into the damp earth, her palms dusty and warm. Their movements were slow but sure, the kind that came from shared rhythm, not hurry. The morning sun sat low behind the pines, casting long shadows over the field behind the cabin. Nathaniel paused to wipe his brow with the back of his hand. You ever keep a garden before? No, Jovie answered, brushing soil from her fingers. But my ma used to talk to the plants like they could hear her. Said things grow better when they're spoken to kindly. He nodded once, thoughtful. That might be true. The stalk listens when I speak soft. Maybe beans do too. She glanced up at him. You always talk to your cattle? Only when I'm tired of my own voice. Her laugh came quiet and sudden, surprising even her. He looked over, and though his face stayed even, something settled behind his eyes, a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. They worked until the sun reached its peak, then stepped into the shade of the porch. Nathaniel poured water from the pump into the tin basin, and Jovie washed her hands, the cold stinging her knuckles. She handed him the towel when she finished. He dried his hands slow. You miss anything from the old place? She shook her head once. Only the quiet after everyone was gone to bed. That was the only time I could hear myself think. He didn't press further, just filled her cup and handed it over. The water was cold and clean. After the midday rest, he led her toward the barn. Inside, the air was close with the smell of old hay and oiled leather. He opened a narrow chest near the back and pulled out a folded length of canvas. I was thinking, he said, unrolling it across the workbench, might be time you had your own saddle. She touched the worn stitching, the leather soft from use. This was yours. Started with it when I was 18. Outgrew it, but I kept it. Figured it'd be useful again someday. She ran her hand over the seat, her fingers catching on a faint scar in the leather. You want me to learn riding proper? You already sit a horse better than most I've seen. But I want you to ride your own, not just hold on behind me. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. I'd like that. There's a mare I've been keeping back. Not the flashiest, but she's got sense. I'll show you. He led her around to a small pen behind the barn. The horse inside was a soft dapple gray, her ears flicking forward as they approached. She stepped close to the fence, and Jovie held out her hand, letting the mare sniff her fingers. She's calm, Jovie said. She's yours if you want her. Jovie looked at him, quiet. You keep giving me things I didn't know I could have. I'm not giving, he said. I'm making room. That night, she brushed the mare down while Nathaniel repaired a latch on the tackroom door. The barn lantern swayed gently above them, casting gold light over the beams. The mare shifted under Jovie's hands, her body warm and steady. You ever think about what kind of family you want? Jovie asked, her voice low. Nathaniel straightened, setting the hammer down. I think about it more now than I ever did. She didn't look at him. I never thought I'd get to think about it at all. He crossed the stalls slowly, stopping beside her. What do you want? She kept brushing, her strokes even. A home where I don't have to brace for every footstep. Where I can speak without weighing every word first. He was quiet a long moment. We're building that. She turned then, her fingers dusty, her hair loose from the braid she'd started that morning. And if I wanted more someday?
Children.
A table set for more than two. He held her gaze. Then we'd make room for that too. If and when you say. She nodded once, like that settled something inside. They stepped back out into the yard, the sky above them streaked with the last red of evening. The air held the smell of turned soil and pine pitch. Nathaniel reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're steadier now, he said. I feel it. You're not waiting for the ground to give way anymore. No, she said, her voice firm. I trust it won't. They walked back to the cabin side by side. No one spoke.
There was no need to.
The wind moved through the tall grass, and ahead of them, the windows glowed with lamplight, warm and waiting. Inside, the bed was turned down, and the fire burned low in the hearth. Before she lay down, she turned and placed her hand over Nathaniel's heart.
Thank you, she said.
He covered her hand with his, rough palm warm against her wrist. For what? For staying kind, even when you didn't have to be. His answer was simple. That's the only way I know how to be with you. They slept close that night. No storm outside, no fear within. Just breaths shared in the dark, and a quiet promise kept. The thaw came slow and steady that year, and by early May, the hills above Larkspur Valley were dotted with new shoots and the pale blush of prairie smoke flowers. The cabin had begun to feel lived in a way neither of them spoke aloud. It was in the way her shawl hung on the peg beside his coat, or how his boots sat beside hers on the porch each night, side by side like they'd always belonged there. Nathaniel came back from the north pasture one evening with a shallow cut along his forearm, bark still clinging to the torn sleeve of his shirt. Jovie was at the table sorting dried herbs when she looked up. You catch yourself on that cedar post? He sat, grunting as he peeled the sleeve back. Damn thing split when I leaned in to check the wire. Snapped up like a whip. She rose without a word, rinsed a cloth in spring water, then bent to clean the cut with gentle fingers. He didn't flinch, but his eyes watched her hands. You've done this before, he said. My ma used to help folks birth calves and set bones. I watched more than I was ever asked to. You remember all of it? Most. Her voice stayed even. Enough to know you'll be fine if you don't go picking at the scab. He smiled faintly, not the kind meant to charm, but the kind that settled deep. You always this sure of yourself? No, she said, tying the cloth snug around his arm. But I never had anyone to be sure for before. He caught her wrist lightly when she finished. "You're not alone anymore." She looked at where his hand held hers, then met his eyes. "I know that now." That night, they lay under the quilt with the window open to let in the scent of damp grass and pine. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the quiet beat of his heart. "I had a dream last night," she whispered into the hush. "What about?" "I was standing in the middle of a field, and it was quiet. Not empty. Just settled. Like everything had finally gone where it was meant to." He ran his fingers through her hair without speaking, his hand warm and slow. "I think it was here," she said. "This place. Us." He kissed the top of her head, then let his hand fall to rest against the curve of her back. "I've never dreamed of peace before." "You will," she murmured. By June, the garden was green with new shoots, and the mare whom Jovie had named Finch had taken to following her along the fence line. Nathaniel built a small coop behind the shed, and she traded 2 jars of pickled onions at the Elk Hollow store for a pair of hens and a wiry red rooster with a bad temper. One evening, as the light turned gold across the fields, she stepped outside to find Nathaniel sanding down a plank, a small square of wood balanced across 2 sawhorses. He looked up when she neared. "What are you building?" He brushed sawdust from his hands. "Bench. For the front porch. Figured we could use a place to sit come nightfall." "You could have said so," she said, setting the basket of eggs down. "I'd have helped." He nodded toward the other sawhorse. "You still can." They worked side by side. She held the board steady while he drove the nails, her fingers close to his, the rhythm of the hammer even. When it was done, they carried it together and set it beneath the front window. She sat first, testing the weight. "Feels like it'll hold." He sat beside her, shoulder brushing hers. "It will." The sun dipped low, and the trees threw long shadows across the yard. She reached for his hand, their fingers fitting like they'd been made to. He turned to her, and his expression held a kind of quiet wonder. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Not even after you brought me here?" "I hoped. But hoping and having aren't the same." She leaned in then, her lips brushing his, soft and certain. When she pulled back, her voice was steady. "You have it now." They sat there until the last light faded, the bench beneath them solid and new, the world around them quiet and whole. The summer passed in the way good things do steadily, with no need for rush. They built a smokehouse, traded with a family south of the valley for a milk cow, and cleared new ground beyond the creek for oats. At night, they read aloud from the old Bible her mother had hidden under the floorboards of her childhood room, taking turns with the passages. Sometimes she sang, low and tuneless, the way her mother used to when the house was dark and everyone else asleep. One evening in late August, Nathaniel came in from the barn with a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Ryder from Elk Hollow brought this. Said it's from the circuit judge." She dried her hands and took it, reading quickly. Then she looked up. "It's the final filing. Says we're registered now. Legally." He reached for her waist, drawing her close. "You're already my wife." "I know, but now it's done proper." He kissed her, slow and warm, and there was no rush in it, just the deep, rooted knowing of something that had grown honest and strong. That night, they walked out past the pasture, the stars overhead so thick they painted the sky in silver. She stopped at the edge of the creek and turned to him. "I want to raise a family here." He didn't speak at once. He just looked out over the land, the fence lines, the barn, the faint glow from the cabin window. "I do too." She took his hand and laid it gently over her belly, her eyes never leaving his. His throat moved once as he swallowed. Then he pulled her to him, holding her with a reverence she could feel in her bones. They stayed like that for a long time, the cool night air brushing past them, the creek running steady at their feet. Years later, the bench still sat beneath the window, worn smooth by time and use. The garden grew wide, with cornflowers blooming along its edge. Finch had grown old and slow, but her colt paced the fence line like she once had. Two children played along the creek bank, their laughter rising into the warm Idaho air. And on the porch, Nathaniel and Jovie sat close on the bench they'd built, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, their hands clasped in the quiet way of people who had built something whole. They had known hardship. They had known silence. But they had made a life together that held no fear, only the steady, earned joy of love that had rooted deep and bloomed full. And it lasted, as all good things should.